I knew something was wrong in my own house 3 days before I could have told you what. It is a thing you learn after a lifetime of keeping a boarding house. You feel the wrongness the way you feel a draft. Before you find the open window, you only know the room has gone cold. That spring my house at number 9 Larkspur Row had gone cold in a way I could not name, and the strange part is that nothing had broken and no one had shouted, and there was no quarrel under my roof at all. There was only my nephew Cyril, who was kind to me, who had come back into my life like a gift, and who was very slowly taking everything I had. But I am ahead of myself, and an old woman gets to tell a thing in order. My name is Agatha Prout. I am 71 years old. I have kept the lodging house at Larkspur Row since my Harold died, which is 26 years now. So the house and I have grown old together, and we understand each other. It is a tall, narrow house of gray stone in a quiet street in the town of Welling-under-Mere, with 6 letting rooms and a kitchen that smells of bread because I bake on Tuesdays and Fridays whether anyone wants it or not. It is not a grand house. But it is honest, and it is paid for, and it was the one thing in the world that was wholly mine. The lodger who noticed was a soldier. I should say that plainly at the start, because everything turns on him, and because for a long while I did not notice him at all, which was exactly how he wished it. He took the back room on the 2nd floor at the end of March. He signed the book as J. Marsh and paid a fortnight in advance in clean folded notes, and when I asked him his trade he said he was a soldier on leave and would be quiet, and he was. He was a big man, broad through the shoulders, with cropped gray fair hair and a stillness to him that I took at first for dullness and only later understood was the opposite. He sat where he sat. He stood where he stood. When he walked down my stairs you could not hear him, not because he crept but because every step was placed. He took his breakfast at the small table by the window, read whatever paper I left out, said good morning and good evening and very little between, and went out walking on the moor most days and came back with color in his face. I had a guess about what kind of soldier he was. He never said and I never asked, but on the Sunday of his 2nd week I saw him through the open door of his room standing at the window in his shirt sleeves, perfectly straight, not doing anything at all, just standing, the way a man stands who has stood for a living, hours at a stretch, so that stillness has become his rest rather than his labor. I knew the look of a man off the great ceremonial duty, the bearskin men who stand at the famous gates and do not move while the whole world photographs them. I did not say so. A man on leave is entitled to be no one in particular. I gave him the quiet he paid for. So you see he was already watching in his careful way, before I knew there was anything to watch. Cyril had arrived 3 weeks before Mr. Marsh, and that is the part I must tell you, and it shames me, so I will tell it quickly. I had a sister, Edith, who went away south when we were young and was not, in the end, much of a sister to me, for we lost each other the way people do in small steps, a letter not answered, a Christmas missed, until the silence was a wall neither of us knew how to climb. Edith died 11 years ago. I went to the funeral and stood at the back and came home, and that I thought was the last of that side of my blood. Then in early March a young man knocked at my door in the rain with a soft good face and Edith's own eyes, and said, "Aunt Agatha, you won't know me, I'm Cyril." Edith's boy. And my heart, which had been a closed thing for years on that matter, simply opened like a door in a wind. He was charming. I will not pretend he was not, because if I pretend he was an obvious villain then I excuse nothing and I learn nothing. Cyril was charming in the way that costs nothing and buys everything. He remembered that Edith had a way of tucking her chin when she laughed, and he did it, and I wept. He brought me a little brooch he said had been his mother's, a cheap thing really, but he gave it as though it were the crown jewels, and I wore it every day. He was good with his hands. He fixed the latch on the scullery door that had hung wrong for 2 years, and oiled the front gate so it stopped its crying. He praised my bread. He filled the empty chair across my table in the evenings, and I had not known how empty that chair was until it was filled. He took the small front room and would not hear of paying for it. "You're my aunt," he said, scandalized that I had even mentioned it. "My only family. I won't take a room in my own aunt's house and pay her like a stranger." And there, you see, there was the first thread if I had had the eyes to see it. A stranger pays, family does not pay. And so very quietly, in the gentlest possible way, by the kindest possible logic, I had a man in my house who owed me nothing and over whom I had no hold of any ordinary sort. He had made himself my family, and you cannot put your family out. Mr. Marsh, the soldier, watched Cyril from the first morning. I did not know it then. He told me afterward, when it was all over, what he had seen, and it humbled me to hear how much was plain to a careful man across a breakfast table, while I had seen nothing at all. "He never let you finish a thought," Mr. Marsh said to me. "He'd ask you a question and answer it himself before you could. He'd tell you what you thought before you'd thought it. A man does that to be liked, but a man also does it to put his words in your mouth, so that later, when you try to remember what you decided, the thing you remember deciding is the thing he decided for you." But that came later. In March and early April, I only knew that I was happier than I had been in years, that my nephew was a comfort to me, and that the house seemed somehow always a little short of money now in a way it never had been, though I could not for the life of me see where it had gone. That was the cold draft, the money. Understand, I am not a rich woman, but I am a careful one, and for 26 years I have known to the penny what comes in and what goes out, because a woman alone with a house must know, or she loses the house. The rents came in. The bills went out. There was always a little over, and the little over went into the brown crock on the top shelf of the larder, and 4 times a year I took it to Mr. Holland at the bank against the rates and the roof and my own old age. I could have told you the figures in my sleep. And the figures had stopped making sense. The first time I thought I had made an error which I never make, but I am old, and old people are taught to doubt themselves first. There should have been 11 pounds in the crock and there were 6. I counted it twice. Then I thought, well, Agatha, you paid the coal man and forgot, and you are getting forgetful, and I put it from my mind, which is exactly what I was meant to do. The second time it was the rent from Mr. Stokely on the 3rd floor, which he always paid me in person on the last Friday, £2.10, into my hand, and which I always carried straight up and put in my own cash box in my bedroom. And on the Saturday it was not in the box. And I sat on my bed and I felt, for the first time, not forgetful but frightened, because I knew the way you know that I had put it there. And now it was not there, and a thing that you have put somewhere and is not there has been taken, and there were only 3 people in my house who could have taken it. There was Mr. Stokely, who is 83 and has lodged with me for 9 years and would sooner cut off his hand. There was the soldier, Mr. Marsh, who paid me a fortnight ahead in clean notes and had no want of £2.10. And there was Cyril. I could not let myself think it. You must understand what it would have cost me to think it. I had been alone, and now I was not, and the price of the not being alone was to believe the worst of the one person who had filled my empty chair. So I did the thing that frightened people do, the thing that lets the wrong go on. I decided I was mistaken. I decided I would simply be more careful, and that the warmth in my evenings was worth a few shillings I had probably mislaid. It was Mr. Marsh who would not let me decide that. Though he did it so quietly I did not, at the time, even know he was doing it. It began with the bank. Mr. Holland at the bank had known me 30 years, and one wet Thursday I went in with the quarter's takings. Less than there ought to have been, but I told myself the season was slow, and Mr. Holland took me aside very gently to the little private room with the glass door, and he said, "Mrs. Prout, I am glad you've come in because I've been uneasy, and I would not say a word to anyone but you. Your nephew came in last week with a letter from you, asking that he be added to the account as a signatory on account of your health, and I held it because I wanted to see you first. You are quite well, I hope." I sat very still in that little glass room. I was quite well. I had written no letter. I will not pretend I understood it all in that moment. The cold thing went all the way down through me, but the warm thing, the wanting not to believe, came up just as fast to meet it, and the warm thing nearly won. Because the explanation Cyril would give me was already forming in my own head before I had even asked him in his own voice. He'll have meant well. He worries about you. He did it out of love. I should like to see the letter, I heard myself say. Mr. Holland slid it across the little table. It was on my own writing paper. Cyril could have taken a sheet from the bureau any day, and it was signed Agatha Prout in a hand that was very like my hand. Very like, but not my hand. The capital P of Prout has a little hook at the bottom that I make without thinking and have made for 60 years, and the P on that letter had no hook. A small thing, the smallest thing in the world, but I had been forging that signature myself, you might say, for 60 years, and I knew the truth of it the way you know your own face, and the woman who signed that letter was not me. I told Mr. Holland I would think on it and that he must do nothing, nothing at all, until I came to him again. And I went home through the rain to my warm house with the full chair in it, and I did not know what to do, and there was no one on this earth I could tell, because the one person I would have told was the one I would have been telling on. That was the night I first really looked at Mr. Marsh. He was at his small table by the window with the lamp on, and Cyril was in the parlor being merry with old Mr. Stokely, drawing the old man out, getting him to laugh. Cyril was wonderful with the other lodgers. Everyone said so. And I came in from the rain with my face all wrong, and the soldier looked up from his paper, and he did not ask me what the matter was. He just looked at me, one steady look, and then he looked deliberately at the parlor door behind which my nephew was laughing, and then back at me. And he said, very low, "When you're ready, Mrs. Prout, I'm in the back room. There's no hurry, but there's no shame in it either. I've seen this done before." I did not go up that night. I was not ready. But he gave me the most precious thing a person in my state could be given, which was not advice and not pity, but simply this. He let me know that someone had seen, that the thing I was seeing was a real thing with a name, and that I was not a foolish old woman frightening herself in the dark. "I've seen this done before." 5 words. They were a lamp held up in a corridor I had thought was empty. I went up to the back room 4 nights later, after the worst thing. The worst thing was Mrs. Lindo. The soul of my house was the long table on Sunday, when those who wished could take their dinner together and not alone, and we had become, over the years, a sort of family of the unrelated old Mr. Stokely, and the Mrs. Carr who taught at the school, and Mrs. Lindo who had the second-floor front and was nearly my own age and had been my friend for 12 years, the kind of friend you do not have to talk to, who knows your ways and is simply there, like a good chair. And Mrs. Lindo gave me her notice. She came to me in the kitchen on the Friday with her notice, and she would not look at me, and when I asked her why, after 12 years, with tears starting, she said only that it was time and that she had been thinking of going to her niece's in the next county, and she said it stiffly, as though she had learned it off, and the whole time her chin was trembling. And she left a week later, and she barely said goodbye, my friend of 12 years, and the house was emptier by exactly 1 good chair. I did not understand it. It was Mr. Marsh who understood it, and it was that he understood my own friend better than I did that finally took me up the stairs to his door. I knocked, and he said come in, and his room was very bare and very orderly, his polished shoes side by side, a single photograph face down on the table that he did not turn over and I did not ask about. He stood when I came in, as a certain sort of man does for a woman of any age, and put me in the 1 good chair, and he himself stood at the window, easy, his hands behind his back, and waited. So I told him, all of it, the crock and the cash box and the bank and the false letter with the unhooked P and Mrs. Lindo's notice that made no sense, and I said at the end in a kind of despair, "And I don't know that any of it is what it looks like. He's my sister's boy. He's been good to me. Perhaps I am only an old woman frightening herself, and I'll have accused my own blood of a wicked thing for the sake of some mislaid shillings and a friend who simply wanted to go to her niece. And Mr. Marsh was quiet for a moment, and then he said the thing I have never forgotten. He said, "Mrs. Prout, I've stood a long time in my life in places where my whole duty was to watch and not move. You learn a thing doing that. You learn that the eye is honest if you let it be, that it sees true long before the rest of you will admit what it's seen, because admitting it costs something and seeing it costs nothing. Your eye saw the pea, your eye saw the crock. Your eye saw your friend's chin shake while her mouth said a borrowed reason. You've seen all of it true already. The only question left is whether you'll be brave enough to stop arguing with your own eyes." I sat in his good chair and I cried then properly for the first time in all of it, and he let me and did not touch me or fuss me, only fetched me his own clean handkerchief and stood by while I used it. And when I was done he sat down across from me, on the hard chair level with me, and he said, "Now, if you want we'll find out what's true, not what either of us fears and not what you hope, what's true. And then you'll decide what to do, because it's your house and your blood and your decision, not mine. I'll only help you see. Will that do?" I said it would do. "Then the first rule," he said, "is that from tonight you change nothing. You are exactly the trusting, happy aunt you were yesterday. You smile at him. You praise his fixing of the latch. If you go cold now, he'll feel it the way an animal feels a change in the weather, and he'll move faster, and a frightened man who moves fast in a corner is the most dangerous thing there is. The hardest work you'll do in the next fortnight is to be kind to him with your whole face while your eyes are open behind it. Can you do that?" I thought of all the years I had smiled at lodgers I did not warm to and kept a pleasant house over a tired heart, and I said yes, I could do that. I had been doing it my whole life. And the soldier almost smiled, the first I'd seen, and he said, "I thought you might. It's the same trade as mine, near enough. Standing still while it's hard." And so began the strangest fortnight of my long life, in which I lived in my own house as a spy, and learned what kind of man had filled my empty chair. We made our rules and we kept them. I was to keep my little record book exactly as I always had, every penny in front of Cyril if need be, never hiding it, so that nothing in my manner gave him cause to wonder. And above all, I was to watch the 3 things he told me to watch, which he said were the 3 things this kind of man always needs and always reaches for, and which he listed for me on his fingers as plainly as a butcher lists cuts. "Money," he said, first finger, "that's the want, everything else serves it. Watch where it goes, and you'll have the shape of the whole thing. Paper," he said, second finger, "letters, signatures, the bank, the deeds of this house if he can get near them. A man can't steal a house with his hands. He steals it with paper. Watch your bureau, your writing things, anything with your name and your own hand on it that he could copy or carry off. And people," he said, third finger, and his face went a shade harder. "That's the one most folk miss, and it's the cruelest. A man doing this needs you alone. As long as you've friends who'd notice, friends who'd say, 'Agatha, that's not right,' he can't finish. So he'll set about, very quietly and very kindly, to thin them out. Every friend who leaves your table is a wall down. You watch who goes cold to you for no reason they can name, and who's been whispering kindly in their ear." And the moment he said it, I understood Mrs. Lindo, and the bottom dropped out of my stomach. It took us 3 days to learn the truth of it, because Mr. Marsh did nothing in a hurry, and I came to understand that the not hurrying was itself a kind of strength I had never had a name for. He did not confront. He did not snoop in a way that could be caught. He simply watched, and had me watch, and let the small true things gather until they made a picture that could not be argued with. The money first. On the Tuesday, Mr. Marsh asked me very offhand at breakfast, with Cyril in the room, whether the old gas mantle in the upper hall had ever been seen to, for it flickered. And Cyril, eager, helpful Cyril, said at once that he'd take it to the ironmonger's, and would I trust him with £1 for it. And I, playing my part, gave him £1. Mr. Marsh went walking that morning, except that he did not go to the moor at all but into the town, at a careful distance, and saw my nephew go not to the ironmonger's, but to the back room of a public house called the Drover's, where a card game ran in the afternoons, and saw my pound and more, a roll of it, go across a green cloth and not come back. That was where the crock had gone. That was where Mr. Stokely's £2.10 had gone, and the rent, and the little over of 26 careful years. Not into want, not into hunger, not into some sad necessity I could have forgiven. Into a card game in the back of the Drover's an afternoon at a time, the way water goes out of a cracked jug, drop on drop, until the jug is dry and you never saw it pour. He's not a clever man in the end, Mr. Marsh told me that night low in the back room. Clever men frighten me more. This is a weak man with a strong charm. He owes money. I'd lay anything he owes it to men who are not kind about it, and he found in you the gentlest possible till. He didn't come to you because he loved his mother. He came because you were soft and you were alone, and the house was enough to drain. The brooch, the latch, the chin, all of it's the lure on the hook. I'm sorry. You're owed the truth, and that's the truth of it. And I, who had loved him, said only, tell me about the paper. The paper was the worst part, because the money was only theft and the paper was the future. Mr. Marsh had me set a small trap, and I want to be clear that it was my trap, my house, my leave given freely. For I will not have it said the soldier did anything underhand in my home without my asking. We left out, on the bureau in the parlor where Cyril could find it, an envelope from a solicitor, a real solicitor, Mr. Ames of the High Street, whom I had gone to see in secret, on Mr. Marsh's quiet suggestion, and who had been more help to me than I can ever repay. The envelope was a decoy. It looked from the outside and the heading like the very first letter of a process to change the deeds of the house, to put it into another name, and we left it where a man searching for exactly that would find it, and we watched. And on the third night, after the house was abed, I sat in the dark at the top of the stairs in my dressing gown, where Mr. Marsh had placed me so that I should see it with my own eyes and not take any man's word, and I watched my nephew come down in his stockinged feet with a candle, go to my bureau, open the drawer where I kept my writing things, and take out a sheet of my own paper and the pen I had written my whole life with, and sit, in the small hours, copying my signature, over and over. A row of Agatha Proots down a practice sheet, getting it better each time, getting the hook on the P that the bank letter had lacked, learning, in the dark, in my dead husband's house, to be me well enough to sign me out of everything I owned. I think a younger woman would have flown down those stairs. I am glad I am not a younger woman. I sat and watched, and the soldier's words held me on that cold step as surely as a hand on my shoulder. Change nothing, see it true, then decide, and I saw it all true, every stroke of that pen, and did not make a sound. When my nephew had practiced his fill and burned the sheet in the parlor grate and gone back up to bed, I went down and raked the grate, and found one corner of the practice sheet not quite burned, with 3 of my own forged names on it, and I picked it out with the tongs and kept it. I gave it to Mr. Marsh in the morning without a word. He looked at it a long moment and he said, now you've got the truth in your hand and no one can talk it out of you again, not even him, especially not him. And then he said the gentlest thing, I'm sorry it's real, Mrs. Prout. I hoped a little that it wouldn't be. There's no pleasure in being right about a thing like this. The last part was the people, and the people were Mrs. Lindo, and I will tell you that the mending of that was the part that made me weep hardest of all, harder than the bank, harder than the candle on the stairs. For Mr. Marsh had said the cruelest tool was the thinning of my friends, and we had, between us, worked out how it must have been done, and then I went with my heart in my mouth to do the one thing I could do about it, which was to go and see my friend. I had Mr. Stokely drive me. He keeps a little trap and a fat, slow pony, out to where Mrs. Lindo had gone to her niece's, a day's small journey, and I knocked on a strange door and asked for my friend, and she came out and saw me and her whole face crumpled. It came out slowly, over a pot of tea, with both of us crying. Cyril had gone to her, kind Cyril, helpful Cyril, and told her, with every show of being torn and only wanting to protect his poor aunt, that I had been confiding in him my unhappiness with her, that I felt she presumed on our long friendship, that I wished her gone but was too soft-hearted to say it, and that the kindest thing would be for her to give her notice herself and let me think it was her own idea. He had pretended it cost him dreadfully, and my friend of 12 years, rather than make me say a hard thing she believed I wanted to say, had quietly broken her own heart and gone, to spare me the discomfort of dismissing her. He had used her love for me as the very lever to take her away from me. Do you see the cruelty of it? Do you see how clean? Not one hard word, not one thing you could lay a hand on. Just a kind young man with damp eyes, sparing everyone's feelings, and at the end of it a house with one fewer friend in it and an old woman one wall nearer to being alone. I told her everything, there in her niece's parlor, the crock and the bank and the candle on the stairs, and the false reluctant kindness she'd been fed. And she came home that very week. She would not be left out of the ending of it, she said, fierce as I'd never seen her, and she said one thing on the road back that I have kept. 12 years I sat at your table, Agatha, and never once did you make me feel I presumed. I should have known the woman from the words. And we held hands the rest of the way over the moor, two old fools who had nearly been parted by a young man's kindness, and I was not alone any more, and that was the first real thing he had taken from me that I had got back. Now I must tell you how it ended, because the gathering of the truth is one thing and the standing for it is another, and it is the standing that I went up the soldiers' stairs for in the end, though I did not know it then. When we had it all, the money traced to the drovers, the false bank letter, the burned practice sheet with my forged name, the cruel using of Mrs. Lindo, and Mr. Ames the solicitor's quiet certainty that what my nephew was building toward was the theft of the house out from under me by a forged conveyance, I asked Mr. Marsh what we should do. I think I expected him to tell me to call the constable and have Cyril taken away in irons, and there was a part of me, I will confess, that wanted exactly that, the hard, fast, clean justice of it. But Mr. Marsh shook his head slowly, and he said a thing that taught me what kind of man he truly was, which was a far rarer and a far better kind than I had understood. "You can do that," he said. "It's your right and no one would blame you, and what he's done is a crime and a vile one. But I'll tell you what I've learned standing where I've stood. The loudest answer is hardly ever the strongest. You can have him dragged out shouting and you'll be the talk of Welling for a year, the poor old woman robbed by her nephew, a thing people pity, and pity is a cold coat to wear the rest of your days. Or," and he paused, "or you can do the quiet thing, the strong thing. You can put the truth in front of him, all of it, so plain and so complete that there is not 1 inch of room left for him to charm or weep or talk his way out, and give him the chance to leave clean and never trouble you again. Not for his sake, for yours. So that the last act in your own house is your act, done your way, in your own strength, and not his crime done to you." I asked him whether that was justice, to let such a man simply walk away. And he was quiet, and then he said, "I think the deepest justice isn't always the loudest, Mrs. Prout. Sometimes it's a man being shown, beyond all his lying, that he was seen all the way through, by someone he thought a fool, and being put out of a warm house into a cold street with nothing he came for knowing it. That's a sentence too. It just doesn't make a noise." And then more gently, "But it's your house and your blood. If you want the constable, I'll fetch him myself and stand at your side while they take him. Either way, you won't stand alone. That part I'll see to." I chose the quiet way. I am still not certain even now that it was the right choice and not merely the soft one, but I think on my best days that it was the strong choice, wearing soft clothes, which Mr. Marsh told me is a thing that happens more often than people know. We set it for the Friday evening, after the others had gone up. I sat at my own kitchen table, where I had sat 10,000 evenings of my life, and I had Cyril sit across from me in the chair he had filled, the empty chair, full of him, and Mr. Marsh stood by the door, Not threatening, just there, that placed and unhurried stillness of his filling the doorway so that the kitchen felt, for once, like the strongest room in the world. And I put it in front of my nephew, one thing at a time, slow and plain, the way the soldier had shown me. I laid the false bank letter on the table. I laid the burned scrap with the row of my forged names. I told him what had been seen at the drovers and by whom. I told him I had been to Mrs. Lindo and that she was home again and that I knew, word for word, the loving lie he had told her. I did not raise my voice. I had practiced not raising my voice, in the back room with the soldier, the way you'd rehearse a recitation, because I knew that the moment I shouted I would be the trembling, robbed old woman he needed me to be, and I had decided I would not give him that. I would be Agatha Prout, who had kept a house honestly for 26 years and knew her own signature. I watched him try them all, every face he had. I watched the wounded innocence, and, how can you, and let it break against my stillness like water on the moor stone. I watched the tears come, real-looking tears, and felt the old warmth in me reach toward them out of habit, and held the line anyway, because Mr. Marsh had warned me of exactly this, that the tears would be the last and strongest weapon, and not entirely false either, for a man like that half believes his own sorrow, and that I must not mistake a man's grief at being caught for a man's grief at having done wrong. They are not the same thing, he had said. The first is for himself. You will not see the second from him tonight, and I did not. And when he had spent every face and the kitchen was very quiet, and the false letter and the burned name lay between us on the scrubbed deal table, my nephew looked at me with Edith's eyes. He did have Edith's eyes, that at least was no forgery, the cruelest true thing in the whole affair, and he said in a different voice, a flat and final voice with all the charm gone out of it like a candle pinched out, "What do you want?" And I told him he would be gone from my house by morning, with the clothes he came in and not a penny more. I told him that the solicitor, Mr. Ames, held a full account of everything, sealed, with the burned scrap and the false letter, and that it would never see a constable's hand or a courtroom as long as my nephew never again came to Welling-under-Mere, never wrote to me, never came near a soul I loved, and never, anywhere in this world, used my name or my blood or my dead sister to work this on another lonely old woman with a house and an empty chair. If he ever did, that sealed account would go straight to the law, and he would find I am a great deal harder to rob the second time. And I told him the last thing, which the soldier had not given me, which came up out of my own old heart, that I forgave him, not because he deserved it, but because I would not let what he had done make me into a woman who carried hate up and down these stairs for the rest of her days. The forgiving was for me, not for him, and he should not mistake it for softness, for I had never in my life been less soft than I was at that table. He went in the morning. I heard the front gate, the one he had oiled so it would not cry, open and close without a sound, and that was the last of him. I have never seen him since. I think of him sometimes, and I find I am not bitter, which surprises me. I had braced for bitterness as one braces for cold, and it never came. Mostly I am sad for Edith, who I think did not have an easy life, and whose boy turned out the way he turned out, and that is a grief that belongs only to me and the dead, and is no part of this story. Mr. Marsh's leave ended a fortnight after. He had stayed the extra time, I understood without being told, to see me steady on my feet, to see the gate close, and to see me still standing in the morning, which I was. On his last evening I tried to thank him, and I tried to pay back the room he'd hardly used for all the walking and watching he had done, and he would have none of either. "You did it yourself, Mrs. Prout," he said, and he meant it. I could see he meant it. "I only stood by. The crock was your crock. The eyes that saw the pea were your eyes. The voice that didn't shout at that table was your voice. I've watched a long time for a living, and I'll tell you the truth, I've found in it most of the standing. Still I do, the famous still standing they photograph at the gates. None of it is the real work. The real work is the day you finally have to use what the standing taught you. You stood still while it was hard and saw it true, and then you stood up. That's the whole of it. That's the only courage there is. I just happened to be in the back room. I asked him, at the very last, the thing I had wanted to ask since the second week. I asked him why a man on his hard-earned leave, a stranger to me, with no blood and no debt and no reason in the world, had taken on my troubles as if they were his own, had walked into the town day after day and sat in his bare room turning my fears into a plan, had spent his only rest of the year on an old woman's swindling nephew. And he was quiet a long while the way he was quiet, and then he turned over for the first time the photograph that had lain face down on his table the whole month, a gray, straight-backed old woman in a doorway, smiling. "My grandmother," he said. "She kept a house too, a bit like this one, after my grandfather went. And there was a man, not blood, a lodger, a charmer, who got into her good graces and her thin little savings slow, the way it's always slow. And by the time any of us were near enough to see it, it was done and she'd nothing. And the shame of it, she'd been so careful all her life, you see, and the shame of having been made a fool of, that did the most harm, more than the money, and she didn't last long after. I was young and far away and on duty, and I came too late. So." He set the photograph upright where it would stand. "When I see it begin now, I don't come too late. It's not goodness, whatever you're about to call it. It's an old debt I pay to someone who can't take the payment. You happen to be the one it got paid to this time." I told him it was goodness all the same, and that he should let an old woman call a thing by its right name in her own kitchen. And he laughed, the only real laugh I ever heard out of him, and let me have it. He went the next morning the way he came, quiet, his shoes polished, the gate not crying. I stood in the doorway in the manner, I suppose, of his grandmother in the photograph, and watched him go down Larkspur Row with his bag, that placed unhurried step, and at the corner he stopped and turned and stood very straight for a moment. A man who had stood at the famous gates, standing one last time at the gate of a gray stone house for an old woman, and he did not wave. He was not a waving sort of man. He only inclined his head to me, once, the way you would to someone you respected. And then he was gone around the corner and away. I keep his handkerchief still, washed and pressed, in the drawer with my own writing things, beside the little corner of burned paper with 3 of my forged names on it that I will never throw away as long as I live, because between them they are the whole of it, the wrong, and the standing for it, and I like to have both where I can put my hand on them. The house is full again. The Sunday table is long again. Mrs. Lindo has the second-floor front as if she never left it, and we do not speak of the time she was gone, except that once a year near the spring, she catches my eye down the table and we say nothing and both of us know. The chair across from me at my own table I leave empty now by choice, and it is not a sad emptiness. I have learned the difference. A chair filled by the wrong man is a far lonelier thing than a chair honestly empty, and I had forgotten that, and I had to nearly lose everything to remember it. People ask me sometimes, for the tale got about the town, the bones of it, though never the worst of it, for I kept that, they ask me how I knew, how a careful old woman could be so taken in, and then how she saw through it in the end. And I tell them the truth, which is that I did not see through it. I only, at the very last, stopped refusing to see what was already plain. The soldier was right. The eye is honest if you let it be. It sees true long before the rest of you will pay the price of admitting it. The whole of my deliverance, when I look back on it, was not in being clever and not in being brave the way men are brave in stories. It was in one quiet lodger who had learned, standing still at a famous gate for years on end, how to watch a thing without flinching until the moment came to move, and in that lodger choosing to sit at the breakfast table of a house that was not his, and to notice, to simply notice, and then to wait, very patiently, until an old woman was ready to be brave. That is the lesson I have, if it is a lesson, from the strangest spring of my long life. The kindest face in the room is not always the kindest heart, and the strongest man I ever knew never once raised his voice, or his hand, in all the weeks he saved me. He only stood still and saw true, and at the last when it was hard he stood up. I think of him every spring when I oil the gate myself, so it does not cry, and find that I have learned to make it quiet too.